We are now joined by clinical psychologist Thato Masia, and she joins us now via our video link. Thato, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, just looking at those two stories, one would say that it is really quite concerning when you see the first incident where the teachers failed to report this to a parent when the child was injured, and a bullying incident as well.
It's quite a disheartening cases, both of them, to hear about. And we would hope, I think, as parents, as professionals, even whoever is caring for those children, we would hope that better measures or steps would be taken in such a situation. But it's quite disheartening to hear that that wasn't the case for these children, and that even for the one, it has led to them not attending school anymore.
And I mean, let's start off with the matter that we saw in the Free State, where the educators had failed to report to the parent that a child has been injured, even though this learner did flag this to the school and flagged it to the teachers. But it seemed as if it was disregarded as just a ball injury.
It's quite a strange case that it wasn't referred or spoken to with the parents, or discussed with the parents rather. But I think this also reflects just the dynamics in which are at play at schools, whereby perhaps the teacher to child ratio is so, there's such a disparity between those two that it can happen where either teachers don't take a case seriously, especially if they haven't seen something happen for themselves, or where often bullying can be misinterpreted as fighting, perhaps, and not recognizing the power dynamic that's actually taking place between those two learners that it's happening with, but even more so when it's a teacher that's perhaps bullying a student.
What does it say when, teachers are not attending to the problems of learners in a way that it seems as if they are willing to listen to them, even though one would say that you're not really seeing blood or the injuries of that learner? How should educators learn to respond to these incidents?
I think it's quite important that there's professional training on these matters, because often perhaps we're lacking the skills to appropriately address such situations. But it's also important that schools are fostering relationships between teachers and the students, as well as with the parents, where students feel that they actually have a space and that they will be heard when they bring these matters up to teachers. But ultimately, teachers are the adults in the situation, and I think it is quite important that they receive the correct training so that they can respond to either de-escalate a situation if they see it as taking place at the time or it's been reported to them, or to respond appropriately once that matter has been brought into their hands, and to definitely inform the parents so that the parents can also take matters even further, because these are not situations that are just specific to the school, but it carries over. It has psychological implications that the child will carry over into their home environment, into their familial relationships, and whatever other institutions they're interacting with outside of the school.
What happens when learners no longer feel safe? I mean, schools should be a safe haven for learners, and one where you feel extremely comfortable to talk about the problems you have as a school pupil. What happens then? What does this do to the psyche of a child?
I mean, there's a lot that can happen when a child is not listened to or not heard, or the situation is not properly addressed. But I think one of the first things we have to think about is the amount of stress that is actually taking place when a child is being bullied, and especially when it's probably mistaken as fighting, which implies that there's an equal relationship between the two students. But often with bullying, there's an unequal power dynamic that's taking place. And in that loss of power, that's a very deep psychological concept, to have power within oneself. And this is where we learn to have self-esteem, self-confidence, and relate to ourselves in such a way that makes us feel like we have the right, we have value, we have the worth to interact with other people and expect that they will relate to us in the same way. So oftentimes, definitely there'll be increased stress, especially if it's chronic bullying. Then of course, then it's a chronic stress that's taking place for that student. And even I suspect even for the spectators who are watching this, it becomes a very high fear of bullying, and children are forced into a position where they either have to take power and step into the position of being a bully themselves in order to avoid the bullying, which only further perpetuates the issue, or they can become the victim in the situation, especially when they don't really have a choice and they are lacking power between whichever student it's happening with. And those students, I mean, will see a decreased academic performance because this child is spending so much mental energy on trying to avoid bullying or trying to minimize themselves in the classroom so that they're not a target. And I mean, that's affecting their memory, it's affecting concentration. So ultimately, they will see an academic decline in their performance, but also in terms of behavior, especially, we'll see it depending on how the child takes it. Either they can externalize, and the anger and the sadness that they are feeling, they might seek out other students where there is a power dynamic where they'll come out on top, so either going and bullying younger students just so that they can regain that sense of having power and feeling incapable, or on the other side, if it's the more quiet side or quiet kind of student, they would internalize these things, and that's when we see depression, anxiety, and even risk behaviors, suicidal thoughts and self-cutting. Those things will definitely come up.
And quite often when we deal with bullying, I mean, that's something that you're touching a lot on, bullying in schools. It often comes from other learners where they are bullying, their fellow pupils. But in an instance like what we just saw with our reporter in Limpopo, what happens when bullying comes from teachers, and teachers should be the ones who are there to protect learners?
I think that is a very disparaging event to take place in any student's life, because ultimately what we're trying to teach in school is getting you ready for life and being a functional adult. But if already in school you're interacting with teachers in such a way where you're becoming distrustful of authoritative figures, it's only going to have a cascading effect going forward for that child and when they become an adult. So, I mean, that will definitely lead to delinquent behavior where there's so much distrust in the systems that are said to be protective, the systems that are said to set you up for life later once you've grown. And I mean, for a child who's experiencing bullying from a teacher, I can't imagine, because at that point, who else do you have to report this to? You're at a loss as that learner, and you're left knowing that there's no one to count on except yourself, in a sense. And even, especially when the teachers are not reporting this to parents, you can't even bring the parental system at least into play to kind of defend or mitigate the situation. So it's a terrible situation that the students are going through, especially when they're being bullied by teachers, because that's the authority figure that they should be able to trust and reach out to.
Ms. Masia, thank you so much for your time and for that insight this evening here in SABC News. That's Thato Masia. She is a clinical psychologist. They're talking about the various issues that are being faced by pupils, of course, be it bullying, and that very bizarre case in the Free State when it came to that learner being injured, and that matter that was failed to be reported to the parents.